And now what? Are we feeding each other? Or?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, we have to cross.
Kayfabe Cards, your ultimate destinations for all things tabletop in Riverton, Utah. Uniting enthusiasts under one roof, we proudly showcase Flesh and Blood, Pokemon, Magic, Weiss, and One Piece, a gateway into an exhilarating universe of gaming. Immerse yourselves in our diverse products, including a very squishy array of Japanese plushies and the excitement of Gashapon machines. Our expansive play area invites you to duel in epic battles and forge unbreakable bonds with your fellow players. We open our doors every day at noon, embracing a realm where cards come alive and unforgettable moments are forged. Come join us at Kayfabe Cards.
Instant Speed approaches its 100th episode, and I thank you guys so much for this journey that I've been on, but I want to invite you to contribute for that very special 100th episode, so I'm doing a call out to you, the community. Yes, you, even you. If you want a question for me to be answered on our 100th episode, you can do so by recording a 30-second or less video of yourself asking the question and send it to me at instantspeedpodcast@gmail.com or however else you want to send it to me. We can figure it out. And I will get that played on the 100th episode. Be creative, be weird, but be genuine. Ask me anything. Cards, life, love, all the curiosities in between. Instant Speed 100 is about you and what you want to hear. Thank you so much. The Instant Speed Podcast welcomes back a former national champion of my country, the only country that matters for this conversation, and a respected voice in the Flesh and Blood community. Also the host of On the Bobble, a podcast that focuses on limited gameplay, which frankly I think people are coming to realize is a very important element of Flesh and Blood. Welcome back, Yuki Lee Bender, national champion. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again. It's been a while since the last time, and yeah, it's always a lot of fun being on the show.
It's a while since the last time on this show, but
yeah.
we did have dinner together where you were essentially subject to some of the complete clownery that occurs when the Toronto crew decides to go get like noodles or pho at some hole-in-the-wall joint, you know, in like the Toronto suburbs.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. As soon as I left, Nia's like, yeah, that's just standard. It's always like that. And I was like, all right.
It definitely takes some getting used to. Like, this is the one thing, is because I've been invited out to dinners after like events, and oftentimes I'm either exhausted, I can't do it, I can't make it, I have other engagements. This is like the first time where Tarek is like, no, dude, you're just coming. There's no question. I said, yeah, absolutely. Let's go. And yeah, like, of all the photos I've seen, and David Root is always somebody who likes to publish, especially Sean Dollywall's wonderful adventures. How I don't want to say exposed are you to Sean Dollywall's antics, because he's like a mascot for many people. Was that your first sort of sit down experience with the Sean Dollywall?
Yeah, like I've played against him or spoken to him like a little bit between rounds, but and I've heard a little bit about him from Nia, who works with him and who I test with. But that was the first time I've had the full Sean Dollywall experience, and he's quite the character.
Yeah, he definitely, that is a perfect explanation for him. Like, it's hard to explain it because he's kind of like a cartoon come to life, and we all love him for it because everything that comes out of his mouth is usually hilarious, genuinely wholesome, or just, you know, it's just Sean-esque. It's weird to say, but that dinner that we all had together on the Friday, essentially the next day was Canadian Nationals, which you finished 9th at, and everybody who is on the outside looking in would love to finish ninth at a tournament of that caliber. But for yourself, a former champion, somebody who just came off of a calling victory as well at US Nats, how does this rank for you? Where do you sort of evaluate your performance at Canadian Nationals?
Overall, I'm pretty happy. The biggest thing is I'm pretty happy with how I played. I think that, it just wasn't, I think it kind of wasn't my weekend. I was doing pretty well. I finished day one at X and 2, and I picked up the first round of day 2. So I had 2 win-ins, and neither of them went my way. One of them was actually against Sean Dollywall. He command and conquered me right away, and then he followed it up with a Tomol tie and got my New Horizon. So it wasn't much of a game. And then I ended up losing a pretty close Lexi mirror to Isaac Kroot. I think he played better than me. I think I made a couple mistakes in that game. And that was maybe the one game where maybe I could have swung things that I played a bit differently, but I'm not sure. It was very close, and I think Isaac played very well. So disappointed for sure. I would have loved to have come in top 8 and had another shot at, hopefully winning or, gold foils or whatnot. But overall, pretty happy with it. I think I was in a good spot. I played well, and we're still playing cards, and sometimes that's how it goes.
So let me ask you this then, because you it's a very mature approach, and a lot of players struggle with this kind of the reality of coming up just short, and everybody who has really put in the work will feel that sting of an important game that they may have had, or losing on breakers, or just coming up short. How do you approach these kinds of situations? Is it something like, for example, for you right now, is it already long gone and forgotten, and you're just thinking about the next thing, or does this kind of haunt you for a certain amount of time? How long does this kind of stay with you?
This particular one is staying with me a little bit more. I woke up last night, actually, before my flight this morning, and I sort of went, I think in this spot I should have made a different play, and that kind of sticks with me. But I think it's more that than, it's not like, oh, how could I come in ninth? I came in ninth because I needed to win one more game. I didn't get unlucky. I needed to win another game, and I didn't get there. But usually if I can feel like I did the best that I could have, it's pretty easy for me to kind of look past and just go, it wasn't my weekend. But sometimes when you can look back and go, oh, I really had some better decisions there, and maybe that would have made the difference, though, those do sting a little bit more and do stay with me. But I try and, draw on it as a learning experience, because at the end of the day, the goal's never just any one event. It's just to do as well as I can in general. And maybe this wasn't my weekend, but maybe there'll be another one down the road.
Well, it's interesting you should say, because like you saying that, oh, I needed to win one more game, but you moved into day 2, X2, right? And you might be agonizing over the Sean Dollywall game or the Isaac Kroot game, but in reality, it could have been any of those other games that on day 1. Do you ever just kind of have this bird's eye view of your entire tournament performance and say, well, it could have been this game, or are you always just dead set locked on those on the performance of the games that really the stakes are at their highest? Your second to last round, your last round, the win and ins, etc. Those always come to the forefront because they are the ones that have the most immediate impact. But is there any part of you that goes even further back to day 1 and say, oh, you know what? Like, if I had just won this game, I wouldn't have been in this position?
It's possible. I always kind of try to be careful about looking too far back, because it would change everything, right? If I didn't lose whenever, I forget exactly when I lost one of the draft, one round in each of the drafts. If I didn't lose those rounds, all the pairings would be different. I'd be in a different bracket, and who's to know how it would go? So it's sort of, I don't know. Well, it's true that maybe had I won that game, I may have gotten there. It's also just so much of the tournament would change that it's really sort of just like a whole different timeline and sort of hard to put too much weight on. But certainly when you do get to that win and it's like, well, know had I won that game, I would be in top 8. There's no maybes about it. So, but yeah, I will still look back to any mistakes or things like that. But overall, I was pretty happy with my draft. I would have loved to have gotten, a 5-1 instead of a 4-2 in draft, but I feel like I played well, I drafted well, and I did about as well as I could have hoped to do, just the way those games played out.
So I want to also ask about the fact that, again, it could be a difficult feeling, but you are a winner already. You have won. You're the first ever Canadian national champion. You came off of winning a huge calling in Las Vegas. Does that kind of numb the sting a little bit? Does it maybe just add to it, where you come off of this confidence saying, I am a champion, I've won this before, plus I just won an immense tournament not too long ago, How does that affect you walking away from this tournament just coming up short?
I think overall it makes me feel pretty good, actually. Like, on one hand, I think if, this was my first ever competitive event and I came in 9th, I'd probably be thrilled. So it does color it a bit in terms of like, I've done it and I would like to do better than 9th. But overall, 9th is still great. It's a strong finish. And I just feel great about doing so well at the calling and then also doing well here. So if anything, it's kind of a confidence boost for me where, you're never going to win every event. Everybody loses. Sometimes the tournaments are really set up to make a bunch of people lose and there's only one winner, right? So it's very hard to be the one winning the event and taking it all down. And that isn't always going to be me, and I don't expect it to be. So overall, just happy to have some consistent results these last month or so, these last few weeks.
How do you rate the field in terms of Canada specifically? A couple years ago, a year and a half ago, Canada was arguably pound for pound the best country in the world in terms of the game. And I don't think that's the case anymore. But seeing this, there's a lot of recognizable names and there's a lot of big time players that are out there. But in terms of where Canada ranks right now, do you have any thoughts about that in terms of on the global scale? We're moving into Worlds, and last year I thought that Canada was going to have an incredible showing. I thought Canada was going to do well. I thought Poland was going to just, crush it. The US, obviously, Spain, there was a lot of amazing players, but Canada kind of just fell flat. And where do you rank Canadian Flesh and Blood these days?
It's sort of hard to say. Overall, I do think it is pretty high up there. There's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of really strong players. And I think when you get into the upper tables and day 2 and all of that of Canadian nationals, it feels honestly just as hard as a calling day 2 when you get to the late tables, or even like a Pro Tour World situation. I haven't been at admittedly, I haven't had a Pro Tour Worlds go my way in a while. I did very well in New Jersey, and then the other ones I've done okay, but I haven't been like right at the very, very top tables. So I don't know, maybe that's a cut above. But as far as I can tell, like the Canadian scene is very strong, and there's a lot of really strong players there. And I mean, I think it's true that we haven't had Canadians taking down events or maybe even top 8ing events in a while, but they're always having strong showings. And I think, I don't think it's like we've fallen out of favor or anything. I think we're still pretty much just as strong as we were. And it's just a matter of, there's some variance in card games and things will come around again.
I think that, I think Canada was just very strong for a while. Not to say that other countries were not, but I think that there's a lot of regions out there that caught up, and
yes,
and I think that it's fair to say that we haven't gotten worse. It's just that there's a lot of other regions out there that just became exceptionally good as well, and it has created this battlefield where it can go any way, shape, or form, and that's a good thing in my opinion. I think that it's not a regression; it's merely just people are continuously accelerating towards excellence, and it's a pretty wicked thing to look at. But one of the major elements of national season, which is going to be a part of Worlds as well, is limited. And you are someone who has a podcast, has content that is very focused on the limited format, be it sealed, be it draft. Draft being, in my opinion, a very humbling experience for a lot of very elite players. And sometimes things just don't go your way. Sometimes things don't line up. But there were also players out there who just said, you know what? I just didn't respect it enough. And I didn't give it the right amount of attention in preparation that I may have thought. What was your approach in terms of time to prepare for draft?
Yeah, so I often don't put too much extra time in for draft, but I still draft a lot. Vancouver's sort of, we like to think ourselves as having a strong draft scene. There's quite a bit of draft that goes on here. I'm usually playing about roughly 2 armories a week that are draft. And I would say that the competition there is usually pretty strong. And then we'll also organize some drafts on the weekends, just kind of anyways. Certainly leading up to events, we'll do like draft camps and that sort of a thing. But honestly, even when there aren't events coming up, we'll get people together and draft because people just really, really enjoy it. So that's usually the bulk of my practice. And I usually find that often we're like really keen to play a whole bunch of draft early on. And then as we get to the like 2 to 3 weeks before the event, we'll kind of switch over to CC and focus on CC more once the metagame's more established, and then kind of come back and brush up on draft in the week right before, where we can sort of, do a few more reps, brush off the cobwebs and go, oh yeah, I still remember how to draft this format. But I kind of like that approach because sometimes if you try to predict the metagame too far out, there's no way to know. Like some weird deck shows up or something wins an event and everything changes, and you just get much more information about CC closer to the event. So I've liked starting with draft and then circling back to it at the end.
I feel draft is kind of like evergreen in terms of how you can prepare for it. You can prepare for it today or a year from today, as long as the set's the same, the variables aren't changing. And like I said, humbling elite players may sound dramatic, but in reality, there was a lot of players that did exceptionally well in the CC aspect and then just fell flat, be it not for lack of practice necessarily, but perhaps it's just sometimes it's a skill set that people don't have. But oftentimes also it's just the set that you're drafting. And some of the critique, I suppose, that I've heard floating around about Monarch draft, it's like 2 completely opposite ends of the spectrum. I've heard that Monarch draft is awesome, and I've heard that it's absolute dog water. And where do you stand on it? And again, this isn't a barb at LSS in any ways. But I would like your candid, evaluation of Monarch as a draft format.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the middle actually. Monarch might be my least favorite draft format for Flesh and Blood. I still think it's okay, but I've also generally really liked all the other formats. I know some people have had complaints about Tales or about Uprising, and I really liked those formats. I thought that they were great. Monarch is maybe just a little bit short of that for me. I think the draft process is really interesting. I like the 15 card packs. I like the overlap of the talents. I like how the heroes have sort of different ways you can build them. It feels like you can have like a belittle minnowism chain, or you can have a chain that's not built on that, for example. So I really like all of that about Monarch. I just wish that it felt a little bit less swingy. I feel like all the decks are so powerful that sometimes, and this kind of happened in my first draft, I drafted a Bolton deck. I was really, really happy with it. I had a Spellblood and a V in it. It was pretty good. Some of my charge cards weren't perfect, but I mean, as far as a draft deck goes, I was really happy with it. But I just played against a chain. I played against, who did I play against? Was it Oscar? I think I played against Oscar on chain, and he just had an amazing chain deck. He belittled minnowism me like 3 times in that game, and he was just hitting me for 15 over and over again. And it was like, I don't feel like I could have done much that game. And it's not to say that my deck was bad or anything. It was just, I got run over, and I find that happens a little more in Monarch than some of the other sets. And that's my biggest, the biggest thing that I don't like about it is that can happen. and kind of all the heroes are capable of just attacking you for 15 to 20. So it's a little bit like too powerful for my taste, but other than that, I think the set's actually pretty good.
So I'm getting some questions from the community as well. Again, Limited being in the forefront here because of its significance in nationals, and we're still approaching Worlds where it is going to be important as well. It's going to be bright lights, right? For Worlds. Yeah, that seems interesting. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, it's all mechanologist, right? Do you have a thought on that as like the draft format? Like, in my opinion, I thought they would have busted out something like, hey, we're just going to do Welcome to Wraith as like a nice little change of pace here. But how do you feel about bright lights?
Yeah, so I actually think that we'll see. I need to see all the cards and need to actually play the format, but I'm pretty excited about the idea of a all mech set. Not necessarily because it's mechanologist, but I just think all of the same class could be really interesting. I'm hoping that there's a lot of overlap in the cards and cards that are kind of like flexible between different decks, as well as cards that really shine in specific builds or in specific archetypes. So I think that if they do a good job with this, it could be one of the deepest formats we've had, and there could be a lot of room to kind of stay open, play different decks, find different creative archetypes. So I have high hopes for this set, but we'll see if I don't know if I'm just being optimistic or like saying what I'm hoping to get out of the set, or if that's actually how it will be.
There's nothing wrong with that, honestly. I mean, it's hard to even evaluate that because we don't know anything of it. We have I think we got some of the cards from the expansion slots, which are gonna feel bad when the last card that's wheeling around is like some random Majestic Brute card that no one can play, and that might be a good card, but then again, in the scope of what the tournament is, they can't really do anything with it. But hey, if you score that tunic, good for you.
That's true. Yeah, the tunic in your draft pool will be pretty.
But who knows?
Incredible.
I mean, maybe like the Evo stuff is just gonna outpower the tunic in that format. Again, it's all up in the air. One of the questions that came in from Fabled Hero and Zed asking, from watching on the Bobble, we know that you're very comfortable in Limited. Has this given you an edge? And should we all be spending more time on Limited? I would imagine that it's obviously given you an edge focusing on Limited, but how much time? Obviously, spending time on Limited is important given a lot of these tournament formats. But, how deep should people be going into this?
I think that being a strong Limited player is really, really important. And, if you think about Worlds, 6 of the 14 rounds of Swiss are limited. And if you are comfortable drafting, that is a huge advantage. So I do think it's something that people should work on. And I think a lot of people are working on. One of the really nice things about Limited is that a lot of the skills are transferable. So while you do get better at drafting a specific set, the more you draft it, you also get better at drafting in general. And a lot of things like understanding how to read signals or when to pivot between decks, or how to, when things aren't going your way, how do you salvage that draft? That's a big one. All of those things are things that transfer really well. And I mean, I kind of answered earlier that I'm playing maybe like 2 to 3 drafts a week leading up to the event. But also I'm somebody that I drafted Magic for a long time, and that was pretty much the only way I played Magic. And I was drafting a lot of Magic with a lot of very strong drafters. So I have a lot of background in that, and it's easier for me to pick up a format. And if I've drafted a format, 30, 40 times, I feel pretty comfortable with it. I don't feel like I need to kind of learn all the basics. So that is one of the very nice things about Limited, is once you have put in the time and the reps and really thought about the draft process and all the things you can do in it, I think it's really rewarding, and you can take that with you into any format you go into.
So you obviously are practicing with a lot of world-class players and for these high-level tournaments, but I'm wondering, you focusing a lot of the content that you do on the Limited format, are people still overall just kind of disrespecting draft as a legitimate format. And it's odd to say because a lot of people are going to be listening to this who love draft and be like, obviously not. But at the same time, there's a lot of players out there who who kind of equate draft similar to how others might equate blitz, let's say, where they think, hey, this has no place in a championship tournament because of certain things like, the variance of the packs and this and that. It's like you want to have a tournament, make a all draft tournament, but this mixed format stuff is kind of for the birds. What do you think in terms of from what you're hearing from a lot of the community, how people are regarding draft as a format?
Yeah, I think it's definitely mixed. There are people who I think understand the depth and the depth and complexity of draft as a format, and I think there's also some people who do chalk a lot of it up to variance. And it's actually something that I try not to get too involved in those discussions, but it does kind of bug me personally. I think that in draft you make so many more decisions than you do in constructed because you're playing with all kinds of weird cards. You're building your deck on the fly. And one of the interesting things about draft is I think if you are a strong drafter, you are going to have a stronger deck on average than your opponent in a draft or in any given draft. And that's not something that's really true in constructed. Like, of course, like somebody will break the format and they'll have the best deck in the room, and that does happen, but that's pretty rare and pretty hard to do. And I think if you are a very strong drafter, you will actually be able to have just an advantage just from your deck alone in draft in a way that you can't in constructed. And I know for myself, I actually I win a lot more games of draft than I do of constructed. My win rate in draft is much higher than my win rate in constructed, and I think that there's just kind of more room for that skill expression in that format.
I sense that there was a nerve that might have been struck slightly, and I want to kind of again poke that bear a little bit because I feel you on that. Where something that you believe has a lot of merit, has a lot of worth, is deeper than people give it credit for. Trust me, growing up as a comic book and Star Wars fan, where people thought it was just silly, I'm like, there's so much depth there. There's so much, you just peel back the layers and find the beauty behind it. But the way that you've expressed it as And I think that in terms of just one very simple sentence that you said that kind of hammers it home, which is if you're just a good drafter, you will always have the better deck because you're better prepared. And even though, everybody's drafting from the same pool and maybe your packs that you're opening have bad pick ones, but, if you make better decisions consistently, you will have a better deck. I kind of want you to maybe elaborate on this. And really, I want to find a little bit of that Yuki anger that slightly splashed up because you're always so composed and so articulate. I want to get you mad, Yuki. What gets you mad with draft? Like just say it. Just go for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is one of the things that I guess bugs me sometimes is the people complaining about the variance in draft and the things you can't control.
Screw those people.
And it's true. Like those drafts happen. And honestly, I had a draft like that this Nationals. My second draft, I drafted Livia. I was the third Livia in the pod. I thought it was open. The person passing to me pivoted into Livia. I got cut, and I didn't have a very good deck. None of us did. The thing is, though, I think really the right question to be asking is, what can I do about it when this does happen? Sometimes you can identify it happening and you can pivot and get a different deck. I couldn't do that in this seed. I don't think there was a way to. And sometimes that does happen. But also, how can you make the most of that draft that is going off the rails, right? Because you're not just like a bystander. You go, oh, well, somebody cut me, so I have no decision. You're still making choices. And some of the choices I made was, well, this pulping and this yellow dread screamer aren't good in my deck because I don't have enough sixes to play them. They don't do anything in my deck. I can't reliably play these cards because I don't have enough sixes. So I'm just going to be drafting as many sixes as I can. And that actually, I think, gave me some advantage in a Livewire mirror I had. And I was able to kind of cobble together a win in that mirror. And then also later on against a Prism player who I think had a considerably better deck than me. But, you know, I played to my outs. I found a way to get a Convulsions with a, what's that card called? It gives the next attack +4, you banish 3 cards. Anyways, I managed to pitch deck a 14 Dominate in a deck that didn't have very much else going on with it. And that was sort of the best that I could do. And I had to hope that my opponent leaked damage and I could get a big Dominate attack in the game that way. And it worked out. And I did manage to get a 2-1 out of that draft with what I think was not a great deck. And, you know, sometimes you'll be able to do that, sometimes you won't. But I guess all of that's to say that I think that people can dig a little bit deeper, and that sometimes if you just say, well, I just got unlucky, I got cut, you're really kind of cutting yourself off from any opportunity to learn or improve from that experience, or figure out like, well, what do I do about it? Because nobody likes having a bad deck, but like, you know, in that draft, somebody pivoted late. There was 3 Liviyas. I got to play one of them. Their deck sucked too. And there was 3 Prisms in that pod, and they weren't happy with their decks either, right? Like, so often when the pod doesn't go well, like everybody's deck is bad. And you can feel bad for yourself about how bad your deck is, or you can figure out, well, how do I still give myself the best bet to, like, maybe I don't 3-0 this, but maybe I can get a 2-1 out of it. And that's so much better than just going on tilt and going 1-2 or 0-3. And everybody has bad drafts, you know, but you can salvage a lot of them.
I have been the cause of and the on the receiving end of bad drafts. Trust me, I just like to see that. I like to see that passion, honestly, because it's something that a lot of people out there, you know, just immediately dismiss a certain format to variance. Same thing with Blitz. People are like, it's a coin flip game, because either if you go first, you go second, whatever, you know, it's a win-loss based off of the coin flip, which ultimately it isn't. The next question is one that I much adore, because coming from Vegas, being somebody who played a metric ass load of poker through high school and college, this question resonates a lot with me specifically. It's from Sam George saying, what do you make of players who complain that others in the pod, quote, not knowing how to draft, how it ruins their own draft play? So this is oftentimes a situation that you see a lot in poker, where you'll make bets assuming that the other player that you're betting against is a seasoned veteran, where their betting patterns, etc., but ultimately they're just making bets and throwing money around with garbage cards, and you don't know what to play around. I want to know, in terms of drafting, how that mentality, or that reality of having bad drafters in the pod, might affect the pod itself, and how you respond to people who might blame bad drafters for their own poor performances.
Yeah, I think overall, again, this feels, I hear a lot of this, and I always feel like it's like a little bit of an excuse more than anything. It does change the dynamics of the draft a lot, and I think it's part of the reason that drafting at an armory level is important. There's a lot of strong players in my area, but you know what? There's people who it's their 3rd draft ever, and you learn to draft with people like that, or you learn to draft with people who are just forcing. And all of that is important. And I think that if you've done the practice and you've seen that in action, you should be able to adapt to that. I often find the drafts where I'm getting passed to by a weaker player are almost easier than the drafts where I'm getting passed to by a stronger one, because they might not be valuing some of the cards right, and I have more opportunity to get very powerful cards. There's a few of my locals, Jay, who does the podcast with me, and Eric Lair, who also is a very strong drafter, and he was casting at Canadian Nationals. And I hate getting passed to by them, because they take all the good cards. I don't get to see any of the good cards. There has to be multiple good cards in the pack for them to make it to me. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you need to understand that while you've done all this practice, the people in your pod at Nats aren't necessarily going to value all the cards the same way that you are. And maybe they're higher on some cards than you are and lower on others. And it's not even about whether they're right or wrong. It's about just trying to piece together what you think that they're drafting and give yourself a good shot to draft whatever's open. And sometimes when you're getting passed to by those weaker players, you can be playing the same deck as them, but maybe they don't understand that what the key parts are, and you can still have a better deck than them. So yeah, it's hard to like give like really concrete advice about what to do here, because it's so like it's always so contextual in draft. But I do think that there's I don't know. I think that the pods that have players that are inexperienced there's often a lot of opportunity to get the craziest decks.
Yeah, you'll definitely get crazy decks, but at the same time, like this is always my critique, especially when it comes to poker. It's like, well, you don't get to choose your opponents, so you don't get to always play against people who you think you know how they're going to play, like how they're going to play. Plus, the best players in the world are not going to play with the specific patterns. And again, this holds truer to poker, obviously, because in Flesh and Blood you want to be drafting to a specific class, talent, powerful cards, etc. But I find it like it's a little bit of a cop-out to a degree, where if you're blaming the person 3 seats away for how poorly you drafted, then you gotta sort of look within. Like it becomes more of an issue of, what are you afraid of? Like, why are you making excuses? Like, you could use this kind of energy to improve.
No, absolutely. And like to your point about poker, I'm not much of a poker player myself, but from what I hear from other people I know that are really into poker, they love being at the tables with weaker players. Like, yeah, they're unpredictable, and maybe sometimes they just run really hot and they get you. And I guess draft is kind of like that. Like, you can get, like, not to say it's never a disaster or nothing ever goes wrong because there's a weaker player at your table, but on average, like, that's an opportunity for you. And I don't know, if you are as good a drafter as you believe you are, I think that you should still be able to find an edge regardless of how strong your opponent is.
We were in Vegas, and we were at it was at the Westgate Poker at a cash game. It was like the Sunday after the entire thing wrapped up, and we're at a table. It's myself. To my left is a vacant seat. Then it's Yuki Lee, some other Flesh and Blood pro, Tarek Patel, Brian Gottlieb, another rando, Roger Bodie, and then back to me. So there's one non-Flesh and Blood player there, and we're all there just to shoot the breeze. And I felt so bad for the dude across from me who was not part of it, but he was a nice enough person, and I was like trying to make conversation with him. He was asking us questions about the game, but he knew we were all just there to kind of just literally limp in blinds, get drinks, and just ease the night away. But then this one dude shows up, dressed like Colonel Sanders, like some old dude, white suit, head to toe, sits down with this big stack of money. And like you mentioned, good players like when they're playing against, weaker or other opponents, because sometimes it just feels like in poker, it's like it's easy money. And that was it, because everybody's just kind of immediately were like, okay, that's who we're taking money from. Like, we're not going to take money from each other, except for Yanji, because Yanji is a gamer, and he went after Roger Bodie, and Roger busted him up. And I love Yanji, but Yanji didn't say goodnight to anybody. He got up and left. I think he felt a little bit upset about it. But it was funny because basically Roger was like, all right, you want to play this game? Like, we'll play this game, and he just took him out. But yeah, it's always a good feeling. I do want to ask you though, coming back to Flesh and Blood, do you feel like draft has a place at Worlds, or do you feel that it should be more of a classic constructed only tournament?
I think it absolutely does. I think that you're trying to figure out who the best Flesh and Blood player is in the world, and they should be able to play draft as well as constructed. I think it's as simple as that. And I think that you see a lot of the very, very strong players succeed in these mixed formats. Pablo, Michael Hamilton, a lot of them have done really well despite it being mixed format. So yeah, I think it's, for me personally, it's way more enjoyable. Having multiple formats, I think, is just more interesting, and it's very skill testing. So yeah, I think it absolutely should be a part of Worlds, and I'd be very sad if we didn't have limited be as part of it. I think it's important.
I agree with you there. I feel like obviously Classic Constructed is it's the nucleus of the game, but draft is a whole other skill set. However, what about Blitz? I have to ask you about that because it's not on the docket anymore. And what James mentioned was that he doesn't want players to have to shift their focus so much from one thing to another thing to another thing, which kind of maybe takes away from, the overall. So, all these players who are completely dialed into their best abilities. Do you think Blitz is part of that in any capacity? Like, would you see perhaps down the line where maybe draft is wheeled out and Blitz is wheeled in?
I don't personally love Blitz, especially right now. I think that the format is just a little too powerful and a little bit too swingy for my tastes personally. That's not to say there's no skill in Blitz. I think there absolutely is skill in Blitz. I just think that it's more random than draft and more random than constructed on average. That being said, I think there have been really fun Blitz formats. I liked Blitz when I was starting out the game, and we had sort of like the kind of defensive or mid-rangey Ira decks, and I think that format was actually really interesting in skill testing. So it's not to say that Blitz can't be a good format, but I do think that I prefer playing games where a bunch of the decks aren't just presenting lethal on basically the first turn that they get to attack you. It's a little bit much, and it does take away a lot of the agency. And there's good Blitz games to be had. It's just that there's a few too many of them that are kind of won in a landslide for my personal tastes.
Alrighty. We don't need to go deeper than that. But what I do want to touch on is who you're essentially synonymous with, who you put on the map. If I were to sort of go down to the patient zero of Lexi's success, it would be you. And Lexi now has separated herself from the conversation of what the best deck was. There was a little bit of time where people were considering it as being Icelander, and I was adamantly saying that it was Lexi the whole time, despite Icelander's early success in the season. Where do you put Lexi right now? How strong is Lexi? And that's a very broad question to ask, because you could say very strong, but let's just put it into perspective here. How strong is Lexi?
I think that Lexi is the best deck by a decent amount. It's something that actually took me a little bit to settle on. It wasn't so clear to me as it was to you, but playing the PTI event on Icelander really kind of hit it home to me when I lost a bunch to Dromize. And I just sort of realized, I'm like, well, Icelanders, I think Lexi's quite favored into Icelander. So Icelander has a worse Icelander matchup, a worse Lexi matchup, and I think a worse Dromai matchup. That's the three biggest decks. And if Icelander is one of your picks for the second best deck, like, that's a really big deal, having worse matchups into the top three decks. That's huge. So I think that Lexi is maybe not quite as dominant as something like a Starvo, where you basically needed to be playing Starvo or one of the two other meta decks, or like you kind of needed to really consider what you were doing. It was hard to win any games. I think Lexi is not quite that. We've seen, like Katsu's do well. We've seen other classes do well. You can get games off of Lexi, but I think that she's just very strong, very consistent, and just comes out ahead of pretty much every other deck on average. I think Uzuri is a bad matchup. I think I think Dory is a little bit tricky for her. It's like relatively close. And I think into almost everything else, Lexi feels slightly favored to very favored, which just says a lot. Like, I think she just has a lot of 55-45, 60-40 matchups. And when you're just kind of good into everything, that, I think that makes her just overall the best deck. You can play other things. You can still do well with them. They're not so, she's not as polarizing as some other decks have been, I think, but she's very, very good.
So where would you put her? I mean, you've been playing this game quite a while now. Again, obviously, all the way back from the 2021 National Championships with you won on Lexi at that time. where do you place this deck in this current, where it sort of sits above the rest in this current timeline, in this sort of meta, versus the other big bads of previous metas? And I'm talking about Seed's Chain. I'm talking about Starvo. I'm talking about like Cheerios Briar with Ball Lightning, etc. Where does she rank in terms of those other boogeymen?
Is this in terms of the current constructed format, or
Yeah,
is this like Living Legend?
I'll mention it in terms of like this particular format. For example, if you were to put her in comparison to where everyone else is in comparison to her like a snapshot of right now, and juxtapose it, like put it right adjacent to, let's say, Seed's Chain versus the Field, how much further behind or further ahead is she to the Field versus where like Chain or the other big bads of previous metas were? Is this the best deck separated from the meta that we've ever seen? Is she the closest to the meta as we've ever seen?
I think she might be the closest that we've seen in terms of, at least in terms of like the big bads that have been Living Legended. I don't know, like she might have a bigger edge than Icelander did when Icelander was sort of arguably the best deck. I think that format was relatively close, but that's maybe the closest comparison. I do think that when Chain was kind of full power, he was just the best deck by so much, and you really couldn't play much else and expect to do well. And I think that's just not the case here, even though Lexi is very good. And I would say similar things about Starvo, similar things about the pre-errata Briar as well. So I think that that's the biggest difference, is that the gap between Lexi and a lot of the other decks is smaller than it has been in the past. And I think that's what makes this constructed format, in my opinion, pretty good overall. If perhaps a little bit stale, like it's disappointing to have the Dusk Till Dawn meta look so similar to the Outsiders meta. I think that's maybe the biggest knock I could give against this current constructed format. But overall, you see quite a few decks topping, quite a few decks doing well, and I think that's exciting. And I think it's because a lot of the decks are relatively close. The gap between Lexi and other decks is noticeable and there, but not so insurmountable either.
So bans and restrictions are coming in a couple days. Again, we're recording this on the 13th of September in the evening. No other news in terms of when that's going to be. I think it's on the 18th is when that's going to release. So do you have any predictions? Do you have any suggestions, recommendations? Obviously, the easy one to say is just don't do anything. Like, let her get there. Just let her hit the top, and we will be done with it. What I personally fear is that they hit something and then she just never gets there. She's just constantly lurking about. But what are your recommendations in terms of bans, restrictions, suspensions, etc.?
Yeah, so I don't want to give too many recommendations because I think LSS does a great job with bans and overall. Like, I think they've done a fantastic job managing the format, and I have confidence in whatever they decide on. But and I also know that they put a lot of testing into it, and I don't. But that being said, kind of what I expect in this is I kind of think we might see sort of like an Autumn's Touch suspension like we did with Starvo, where it was like, yeah, nobody thinks that Starvo losing Autumn's Touch means that he's not outrageous, but he's a little bit weaker. And I think we might see something like that with Lexi, because I agree with you. I think I see a lot of people calling for 3 of a Kind or Codex or Voltaire. Like, Voltaire is like the most extreme one. And you could do that, but she's just going to stick around forever then, or much, much longer. And I think that maybe like a soft ban that doesn't really overall hurt the deck that much, but takes the edge off just a little bit might be nice. I could see something like a Heat Seeker ban or an Endless Arrow ban. Some of those arrows that are just raw card advantage, that are just really good with Voltaire, might help. Maybe like Premeditate. I think a lot of these cards that keep her drawing and digging deeper into the deck is almost like part of one of the biggest problems, is that everything draws cards and there's so many power cards and they all draw you into each other, and you kind of just like have this avalanche of card advantage that's really hard to keep up with. And I think if you kind of ate away a little bit at that and made it so that she had to work a little bit more to have 5-card hands, she would still be good, but maybe just feel slightly less oppressive.
So I'm gonna name some cards here, and I want you to do two things. I want you to give your percentage of you thinking that it would get hit with a ban or restriction, and whether you think it should or not. All right. So the first card might be within that Autumn's Touch range, which is Bolt and Shot.
Like 30%. I think Bolt and Shot's really good, and I think if the deck would actually lose a lot with it, but I could see it happening. That would be like one of the strongest bans that I would expect.
But you don't recommend.
I don't think so. I mean, with no testing, I don't think so. I think taking Bolt and Shot would noticeably make the deck much worse, and I think it would really kind of slow down the Living Legend process for her. I could be wrong. Maybe it wouldn't matter, but that's sort of my gut feeling there.
All right, next one is, this is a big deal. Obviously, it's 3 of a kind, and when we're talking about these cards getting banned and just completely, clipping the wings of a particular hero, I feel like this is just putting her out to pasture and just, so thoughts on 3 of a kind?
Yeah, I think it would give her some pretty bad matchups. She really needs this card to keep up with some of the disruptive decks and to be able to block and make up for the lack of equipment. It's sort of like what lets her be competitive despite not really having equipment and not getting an extra turn like Icelander does. So I think that 3 of a kind, well, it might be a ban that she could adapt to and still be a player in the metagame. I feel like at this point, when she's already so close to Living Legend and people seem to be so tired of her, that you might almost just, I don't know, you might just drag it out, So I don't think we're going to see 3 of a kind. I give it a 10%. I think it's possible, but I don't think we're going to see it.
All right, I like it. Next one is Rain Razors.
No, I don't think they're going to ban this card. I put it a 0. I just don't see it.
I don't blame you.
If you take away this card, anybody that plays 3 blocks can just fatigue Lexi, and it's just I think it's just kind of silly. Decks need to have tools to go over the top, and Rain Razors is good, but I don't think it is the problem card in the deck at all.
All right, the other one is obviously the big nasty one, which is Voltaire, and I genuinely believe that there is a world where Voltaire can get clipped because there are other bows that might be able to help out to a degree, but I mean, does that just turn every Lexi player into an Azalea player, or how does a Voltaire ban sound to you?
I put it at a 0% chance. I don't think you can ban Voltaire and have Lexi be a real deck. I think if you ban Voltaire, it will get rid of the Lexi problem, but I also don't think people will play her. Her card pool is just very clearly designed to go wide. You look at all the fuse arrows and Icequake and all of this applying to multiple chain links. I think it's really how she's intended to be played. And something like a Death Dealer Snapshot deck is just, it's not there. And when you try to do the go tall ice stuff, you're kind of just doing what Azalea does with more steps, because you have to do all this fusing and stuff to get the disruption, and Azalea can just red in the ledger you, which is probably just better in the first place. So I think that if you take Voltaire, you really kind of take her whole identity as a deck, and I don't think we'll see that happening.
All right, here's a big one. It's more so of, you got $1,000 and you got to jam it down on no bans or a ban. Are you just thinking that they're just going to cruise past this? Where's your money on this one? No bans or something gets caught?
On Voltaire?
No, on anything Lexi related.
If I had to pick, I would lean towards no bans.
I agree. I tend to agree on this. And I think that there's going to be a lot of backlash if there is no ban. But at the same time, it's kind of like a situation of, just get it out of your system. You'll have to struggle through it, but you'll eventually get through it, and we'll push through it. And it's just another few months, and I get it. It's going to be live at Worlds, and it's going to be on everybody's mind if it's it survives PQ season and all that other stuff. But let's be real here. There are if the more that you clip things, the longer they'll stay and the longer that they'll kind of be annoying to that degree. I think that there's certainly conversation and logic behind the fact that good heroes are just good and they're going to win. And we can't keep reining everybody in who's a bet like the best option in a particular field. I don't think Lexi's unbeatable. I think that she's just very strong. I think that in the grand scheme of things, compared to, the conversation we had where, saying Seed's Chain in its meta was by and large like leaps and bounds ahead of the curve. I don't think that she's not the Chain of this meta. She's the Lexi of this meta, which is, maybe a notch above, but beatable.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that as far as best decks or boogeymans have gone, she's been one of the better ones that we've seen. She's been one of the more balanced ones. I think she's compared to Seed's Chain or Starvo, like full power Starvo, or Stubby's Fi, that was an unhealthy deck. It was attacking you for 40 in the first 2 or 3 turns of the game. I think compared to those decks, she's nowhere near as oppressive. She's just extremely consistent and I think can sometimes feel repetitive to play against for people. It's just endless pressure and on hits.
So there's a question coming in from Fighter of the Nightman. That would be Dayman, I would imagine. But what are your thoughts on Lexi in the Living Legend format? The big news, obviously, being that everything's legal. All the heroes, all the cards, and my conversations with people over the past couple of weeks since that news came out was what's the go-to deck? What is the strongest deck? A lot of people immediately leaning towards Seed's Chain, like we discussed. Starvo being an oppressive force. Oldhim in the mix as well. Where do you stand with Lexi in that field of these absolute titans?
I mean, I think that Lexi is the first deck that I would play in Living Legend and try to make work. I think she might have the tools for it. I played Lexi in New Jersey with Starvo, Chain without Seeds, but he had Belittle, though. Very good deck. And Prism. So that was a pretty high power format. And I think that she was not quite as good as those 3, but she was kind of close. And she's gotten more cards than any of those heroes by far. I think she has a lot of tools to fight against those heroes. I don't know if you can fit it all in the same deck, but Fatigue Shot is fantastic against Prism and Starvo. Tar Pit Trap is really good against Starvo. It just turns off his on hits. She could even do something like play Warmongers for Chain if she wanted to. I think Lexi has an incredible amount of tools available to her, or go Ice to deal with Chain. I think she has some options there. So it's a matter of if you can find the right build that makes everything work. But I think that her flexibility actually could make her a pretty serious contender for that format. And I think that as much as Chain is strong, Warmongers is going to be a problem for him. I really do think that. I think the Prism Fatigue didn't really work against the strongest Chains, but I think when you add in not only Arclight Sentinel, but also Warmongers just turning off their turn, I think that might look a lot harder now.
So what's the best deck in that format, according to you?
I think it might be Lexi.
Oh, come on. For real?
No, really. I think it might be Lexi. I think she might have the most tools to beat everything. Or Starvo. I would give it to Lexi or Starvo.
See, this is fascinating to me because we just discussed about how Lexi's so close to the field in this particular meta, but is potentially the best deck to choose in Living Legend. I'm trying to again, the wheels are turning in my mind over here. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I think that it's obviously anybody's game, but you've presented some good arguments against the other heroes and what might be out there to stop them. But is it just that the other decks that are out there challenging Lexi right now that sort of close that gap is because they're hard counters to her, or they're soft counters to her, or that they're just inherently good on their own as well?
I'm not sure how to put it other than like I think that Lexi has the tools to be built to beat almost anything, and if it's a narrow meta, she's very, very good at doing that. And right now
Sure.
she's just sort of like taking a generalist approach, but if there's like a few targets that you really want to hone in on, she's actually very good at doing that. So I think she might be able to keep up. If I think about it more, it might just be Starvo. Oldhim was pretty close matchup for Lexi already, and I don't know. There's I'm sure that people have developed more understanding about Guardian since when Starvo was legal. So maybe whatever the elite Oldhim players come or the elite Guardian players come up with Starvo would be like a little bit too much for her to deal with. But I think that she would be a surprisingly strong player in that format.
Yeah, I mean, it like picking up a Starvo deck is just like you just autopilot for a lot of it. I mean, there was obviously a lot of, there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of strategy and how to properly pilot it. But ultimately, I mean, when we talk about people within the Guardian school of thought coming a long way since those Starvo days, I tend to agree. Going from Starvo to Oldhim now to Bravo, us Guardians, we're just kind of constantly throttling back. We're just constantly getting robbed of a lot of big tools. But listen, I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of confidence in Lexi, and you're not just saying it because you and Lexi are so synonymous. I genuinely think that your arguments are sound, and if she's out there to hunt for specific things, she'll get them. Like she can crush. Are you going to be playing Living Legend formats if there's tournaments for those?
I would love to. I think it depends what kind of tournaments they are. If it's like side events with a pro tour going on, then hopefully not. I might do it. I might do it if I scrub out or something. That sounds kind of fun, but I would hope to be playing the pro tour. But if there was like a Living Legend calling or something, I would definitely play that. If it was reasonable to travel to, I'd love to.
All right, I'm going to give you a scenario here. All things equal, you, by some stroke of weird, bad voodoo, you scrub out of day one, right? Day two at 11 a.m., there are two events. There's a draft for your favorite set to draft, which you can tell me what that is, and there's a Living Legend CC event. What are you signing up for?
I think I would play the Living Legend one just because I love draft, but I've drafted all the sets before. Welcome to Wraith is probably my favorite, but I like a lot of the sets, to be honest. But I never played Living Legend, so I think the new experience would be fun and novel. And you know what? I realized as I said Lexi and Starvo. I think it actually might just be Stubby's Fi, but I also don't expect Stubbies to be around very long. That deck is just so fast, and I don't know. I feel like it could probably just run over Starvo, but yeah. I think once Stubbies is gone, it would be either Starvo or Lexi.
Yeah, that's the fun part. Is this when James was just saying like, yeah, we're just gonna let the kids play and see what happens. Well, yeah, eventually the barn's gonna be on fire, and you got to figure something out. But last question is from Sigma or DOS asking, can Sandscour New Horizon Azalea be the best replacement for Lexi for those enjoying the double arsenal archetype play in Ranger?
It's an interesting one. I'm not the most familiar with that deck. I did watch a deck tech and took a bit of a look at it. I haven't actually piloted it. I think it is a little bit different in that deck is a little bit more go tall, but it does have some of the same ability to be like very flexible with two arsenals. Probably even more so because of Azalea's ability to essentially like replace an arsenal with the top card of her deck. So I think that it will like in some ways be reminiscent of Lexi, but it won't do. It's not going to operate the way that Lexi does, where Lexi goes. I think the biggest defining feature of Lexi is going wide, presenting multiple on hits, and drawing a lot of cards. And I don't see Sandscour Great Bow really doing either of those things. So yeah, I don't know. It certainly has the double arsenal and the flexibility there, but I think it will be much more go tall and kind of like disruptive and controlling rather than immense pressure that Lexi has right now.
Beautiful. Well, I appreciate those. We do have one more mini segment here where Yuki Lee Bender, former Canadian national champion, calling Las Vegas champion, so many so many accolades to slap on that name, but ultimately she is here right now, and she's going to give us tips on how to play Lexi and how to beat Lexi, which I know a lot of you out there are probably saying, who cares about how to play it? I'm not going to play it. I want to know how to beat it. So for our Patreon Tier 3 exclusive this week, Yuki is going to walk us through all the best strategies. But again, you'll need to go to patreon.com/instantspeed. For as little as $2 a month, you can support the channel. But for you Tier 3 awesome people, that is coming your way. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you for that, Yuki Lee Bender, the maestro of the bow. I don't know what else to call you. I like giving nicknames, but I just was like, I don't know what to. I think I had you listed in like the intro as the Lexi Maestro, but I don't know. I don't think that one sticks unless you want to be the Maestro of the bow. But I don't think that sounds so ridiculous.
It does sound ridiculous, but I don't know. A lot of these names are fun as like one-offs and stuff like that.
Cool. That's how I'm going to introduce you. The Maestro of the bow herself, Yuki Lee Bender, who just gave us 3 tips on how to win as Lexi and 3 tips on how to beat Lexi, and that was only for our Patreon Tier 3 supporters. You can go to patreon.com/instantspeed to support us there. I have one final question for you, and this is incredibly scientific, so much so that I'm actually keeping track on this very scientific piece of paper. Yuki Lee Bender, you can only select one of the following 2. You can select peanut M&Ms, okay? Peanut M&Ms.
Okay.
And the other option is Skittles. What are you selecting, Yuki?
Is this really a question?
Oh, this is so important. I'm not even kidding. This is for me, okay? This is purely for me.
But it's not even close. It's peanut M&Ms by far.
Thank you so much. And like, there are some absolute donkeys out there that completely believe that peanut M&Ms are gonna like fall short or even come close to get out of town. I'm writing your name on the board. Okay, Yuki, you are on team peanut M&Ms. So that's what matters over there. So we're happy about this. And
it's not even close to close, honestly. Like, when you were coming up with another, like, I figured it was going to be another candy. I was like, he's not going to, like, what's he going to ask me? And it's like, Skittles? I'm like, he's not going to ask me Skittles. Like, it's going to be something, like, a little bit closer than that. And you asked me Skittles. I was like, really? It was Skittles? Like,
Skittles?
Come on. They're okay.
They're like, it's like stale gum. It's like mummified gum. And I'm like, not about it. I mean, this all sort of stemmed back from Battle Hardened Atlanta, where DM Armada and I just got into a little bit of a debate about it. And all the polls, every poll that I have run, which are completely scientifically sound and accurate, by the way, have all come back as peanut M&Ms, like by a mile. I just wanted to ask another person with a very robust intellect and a respected opinion what she thought. And well, hey, so if you can, Yuki, can you just look directly into the camera and say, F you, Steven, it's peanut M&Ms. Can you just do that for me? I'll send it to him.
I'll just say, Steven, let's be real. It's peanut M&Ms. Everyone knows this.
All right. Well, you took the nice way out, and I appreciate that. Yuki Lee Bender, the 2021 Canadian national champion and the Calling Las Vegas champion as well. The maestro of the bow. Too bad. That's what you get. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed being on the show with you.
Wonderful. And if anybody wants to catch On the Bobble, your podcast, as well as anything else Yuki Lee Bender related, where's the best place to go?
On the Bobble is on YouTube, Spotify, or most other podcasting platforms, like Apple Podcast, all of that. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm at Yuki Lee Bender on Twitter.
Easy.
Or X, I guess.
We don't.
Right? I'm trying to get used to it, and it never feels right. I feel like I said something wrong whenever I say it.
How do you take a company that has solidified itself within not just culture, but the lexicon of saying tweet and Twitter as being part of the grand scheme of the English language and every language, frankly, and then just say, screw it, we're going to change everything, and just, I don't get it.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm not a billionaire, so what the hell do I know? Anyway. Yuki,
it seems weird.
Thank you so much for doing the show. All right. That's it. That's all. I want to give a big thanks to our sponsor at Kayfabe Cards. Go to kayfabecards.com. Be who you want to be at Kayfabe Cards. I also want to, again, remind everybody that episode 100 is around the corner. If you want to submit a Ask Flake question, you can do so by submitting a 30-second or less video to instantspeedpodcast@gmail.com. I'm going to be doing a Q&A, put all of your questions. I'll have some giveaways to do as well. That's coming around the bend. And to our Patreon supporters as well. You're growing. You're awesome. I love you. Thank you very much for keeping the wheels on track. We'll catch you next time. Don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning. See you next week on ISP.